Hello, welcome back to Rachel's Studio Watercolor Workshop, where I share both the highs and lows of the artistic process. And there were plenty of highs and lows that led to the culmination of this painting I'm sharing with you today, and the tips come from years of painting many subjects, including several successful paintings of children, such as these, and many, many more that could be considered complete total failures. But it is in our quote unquote failures as artists that we grow the most. And so I'm always careful to share those as well. So hopefully you can grow more painlessly as you progress on your own artistic journey. So today I'm painting Alex on the Beach 3. Yes, 3, because I've painted this 3 times. And it will serve as the backdrop for 13 tips I'll share about how to paint children. Be sure to stay tuned until the very end, where I will share bonus tips about great paint and color combinations you can use to create glowing skin tones. And if you would like to learn more in depth from me, be sure to check out my Patreon, where for only $5 a month, you will have access to hours and hours of in-depth painting tutorials designed for you to be able to paint along with me. And they include downloadable traceables, reference photos, a supply list, and access to my list of paint colors I currently keep on my palette. Please be sure to subscribe as I upload new video tutorials every week and hit the notification bell so you'll be notified when there is a new video available. If you enjoy this video, it really helps my channel grow and improve on and expand content. If you like the video, watch until the end and leave me a comment. I appreciate your support so much, and to prove it, let's get to the good stuff. 13 tips about how to paint children. Tip number 1, start with a good reference photo. Now here I will use several different pictures of my son, Parker. This is Parker, and this is an example of a decent reference photo. He was in natural light. Everything's clear. You can see all the details. He's not showing his teeth, which is one of my sub-tips of this tip. Try to avoid painting weird smiles, big smiles with lots of teeth. They often come out very stilted looking, and you really need to know what you're doing if you want to paint a child that's smiling. Otherwise, it will come out really stilted looking. In my experience, seeing a lot of beginners' paintings. Now, here's a picture I took of Parker with a flash. Try very hard not to use a reference photo with a flash. Sometimes you just have to use a reference photo because you're in love with it, and it might involve a flash, but just know that it washes out the shadows in the reference photo that will give you the depth. It flattens out the face, and there are not good lights, mediums, and darks in a picture taken with a flash. Here is an example of a really good reference photo. The light is beautiful, it's natural, it's hitting part of his face, making part of his face really light, and the rest of it's in shadow, which is a beautiful way to paint, and it really will make your painting look 10 times better if you paint with a reference photo that has lighting similar to this. Another good thing is that he's doing something interesting, and a painting that tells a story is always much more appealing than just a boring portrait shot of a child looking straight at you. Now, I included this reference photo because I want you guys to look at the lines in this painting. He's holding his brush straight up and down. So that is not an interesting line. Lines in a painting and how they're composed are very important. Curved lines are good, diagonal lines are good, straight up and down lines, they're a little static unless they're providing contrast to other points of the composition. But that is a concern with this. Now, this reference photo is much better, and his head position is better because it's in that 3/4 position. It's not in profile, it's not looking straight at us, which is a much more interesting position because it shows depth. There's more depth to the face, whereas if they're looking straight at you, it's flatter. They're looking way at you in profile. That can lead to a very flat looking face as well. It doesn't look as three-dimensional as when the face is in a 3/4 view. Here, it's a little less 3/4 view, but he's still got his face slightly turned away from the camera. So this is an interesting composition, and the lines are interesting because that paintbrush leads you up his arm, leads you up to his face, down his other arm, down his leg, and around. So you want to look for lines and composition that lead the viewer's eye around the composition. Another note I would like to say is look at the mouth in your reference photo. Is the mouth relaxed? Is the mouth smiling? Or is it awkward and relaxed? Because a smiling mouth with a lot of teeth is hard. This is another picture I included just because the light is beautiful. He's at 3/4 view. The picture tells a story, that of a young child's joy at seeing a beach. But do remember, if you include the hands in your reference photo and in your painting, you are adding one more level of difficulty to the task, especially if you're a beginner, because hands are really hard. Let's move on to tip number 2. I always recommend in almost all of these tip videos that you trace. Trace to get your proportions correct. Just know that tracing is just yet another tool in the toolbox of an artist, and once you cover up those lines, you're still going to have to rely on your drawing skills a lot. It's just a tool to use to get those initial proportions correct in your drawing so that you can move on and get to painting. And this is especially important when you're painting children, because you really want to, if you really want to get their likeness correct, you'll probably want to trace. That leads us to my tip, which is paint what you see, not what you think you see. And if you don't know what I mean, then I highly recommend the book Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards, where the gist of the book is that it's like you have to turn a switch in your brain. And in order to do that, you have to learn to look at your reference picture and see the shapes instead of seeing what you think you see, which is you might think you see an eye, but what you really see is a rectangle or a triangular shape connected to a rectangle connected to other shapes. And it's important to really look at your reference material and paint what you see, not what your brain wants you to think, because your brain will play tricks on you and make you think you see, for example, in eyes, 2 ovals, when really the shape of the eye might be more rectangular. Tip number 4 is kind of related to the last tip, where you really need to look at your reference photo and look at how as the light moves across the plane of the face and the parts of the body, the colors, the hues, the values change. So the values, meaning the lights and darks, change as you go into a dip between the eye and the nose. It gets darker. As you travel up to a higher point, like the tip of the nose gets lighter. Also, as you move towards the light, especially if it's natural light, more of the local color or the natural color, the real color, the orange and the reds and the pinks of Caucasian skin anyway, will begin to really glow. And then as you move away from the light and into the shadows, you will see the colors become cooler or more purple and blue. And you'll need to add more purple and blue on the side of the face that isn't as lit by the light. So here you see me painting the side of the face that's closest to the light with brighter pinks. And then as I paint the other side, I'll add more blues and purples. While that does look scary, it's so important, especially in your first wash, to get the variety of colors and values in that first wash. Tip number 5. Have soft edges, and here you see me painting in part of the background, and I am allowing that background to completely merge with her left, our right cheek. And the more soft edges that you can have, especially for a young, fresh looking child, the more painterly and soft your painting will come out. And it is scary. Tip number 6, which is connect different aspects of the anatomy. You see me painting the eyes here, and you see me allowing the blue of her eyes to bleed right into the corners of her eye sockets and underneath her eye in some case. And that just allows for some connection. And later when I paint in the darks of her eyelashes and her pupils, I allow those aspects of the painting to all connect together as much as possible. Similarly, when I paint the shadows around her nose, I connect them down into the shadows underneath her nose and the top lip, and then down into the chin as much as possible. And that's another reason why it's so important to find places to connect your background to your subject. Like you can clearly see I've already done here on her left, our right side. I've let that background completely seep into her cheek and her cheek into the background, and that background completely seeps into her hair as if it was almost one shape. So that's another part of painting what you see, not what you think you see, and joining shapes in the background to completely merge with parts of the anatomy of the person you're painting. Tip number 7. The way that I work in every subject, almost every subject, is I work in sections, and this is true when I'm painting people as well, because I want to keep each section smooth and I want the transition soft, and I don't want any blotchiness from weird areas of my paint drying before I was ready for it to. So here you see I'm going to paint her shoulder while her face completely dries. And in watercolor, you do want to let each layer completely dry after you're done painting that layer. And you see I'm painting the clear water completely over some of the boundaries, by the way. And so I'm preparing my paper to receive paint. So when you're painting children, I highly recommend you paint in this way. Pre-wet your area that you're going to paint with clear water so that when you apply the paint, it moves smoothly and has no boundaries and stays soft, and the transitions between different colors you put down in that bit of water you put down, they merge and blend together softly to make nice, smooth, young, glowing skin. So that's an important part of my process to achieving smooth, glowing skin, is to get this water, this water layer down, to get it smooth. You can see I go back over my clear water and scrub it, and the reason I'm doing that is I'm trying to make it all equally wet across the whole area that I'll be painting, so that I don't get puddles, and because puddles will cause your water to pool in certain areas and become blotchy. So you want your first layer of clear water to have just enough moisture to move, to allow the paint to move in it, but not so wet that it's puddling and gets weird edges. So you just want to moisten your paper, and then you let it dry a little bit, and then you apply the paint. So the paint then melts kind of into that moist, clear layer of water that you put in, and it merges nicely and softly and makes the skin look extra smooth, and also makes the colors look like they're glowing because they softly merge with each other. Tip number 8. My next tip is to tell a story. And I chose to put this tip in this part of the painting because, to me, part of the story of this painting is a young girl on a beach. And what young girl on a beach doesn't love a hot pink bathing suit? So the bathing suit, painted with Holbein Opera, by the way, which unfortunately is not light fast color, just so you know, but this hot pink bathing suit is part of the story of this painting, of this being a young girl enjoying her cute little swimsuit with the little flower details on a beach. It tells a story of her youth to have this swimsuit on. Now, in the original reference photo, it also had Winnie the Pooh on, which would make a cute addition. I wanted to keep this simple. I did do this as a tutorial for my Patreon students, and by the way, if you're interested in watching me paint this in its entirety and watch both paintings that I did, my quote-unquote what we'll call my warm-up painting, as well as this painting, which is an hour-and-a-half long tutorial. So here I'm continuing to tell the story, and by the way, do you see how I connected that strap to her background? I let it bleed into the background. And here are some more paintings that I've done. This is of the same girl on a beach. These are two children on a beach building a sandcastle. The girl's running on the beach. Each of these paintings tells a story of a child doing something that is interesting, and it adds a layer of interest for the child to be doing something childlike rather than just sitting and posing for a portrait. And here, of course, is my favorite of all, my son Parker gleefully riding a little toy horse. And all these pictures tell a bit of a story, more so than just a straight portrait would that has. And so when you add that extra layer of story, it just makes your painting that more compelling and interesting. My next tip is that children need jewelry too. Now, if you've watched my other tutorials and a bunch of my other tip videos, I have talked about this quite a few times, where jewelry is so important to a painting. What is jewelry? It's those little details usually added at the very end, but here I'm going to paint them right now, at least part of the jewelry right now, which is her dark little nose holes, her pupils, and her eyelashes. And each of those things are kind of a darker piece of the painting, and they're very small little details, but these small little dark tiny details are what we call jewelry, and they really make a painting pop, especially at the end. Now in the end you'll see me add wisps of hair and the glint in her eyes. If I didn't save it, I usually add the glint in the eyes with a gel pen. Here I painted around the glint in her eye, but that can be considered jewelry as well, and that is so important to really make a painting look finished and to really pop and come alive and add that wow factor. So don't forget your jewelry. Those wisps of hair, the eye glints, the eyelashes, get them really good and dark, and get the nose holes nice and dark. And you will see me go back over these nose holes several times. I fix them and I get them really dark. So always add your jewelry. Children need it too. And one other note about jewelry: don't add too much jewelry. Just like in life, if you wear too much jewelry, it gets overwhelming and it doesn't look good. It would look stilted and overdone. So don't overdo the jewelry either. My next tip is to worry less about colors and more about values. Values are always more important than colors when you're trying to achieve a realistic look. And this is a perfect example here where I'm painting the shadow underneath her chin. And I'm using purple right here, and then next I go in with a more orange color next. And those colors are somewhat accurate compared to the reference photo, but not perfect, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that the darkness of the strokes that I'm putting down mimic more closely what you see in the reference photo. And that dark shadow under her chin really pops out her chin as well and provides some nice contrast. And so I could have used any number of colors in this shadow and it would have looked fine as long as the value of the shadow was correct. In other words, the darkness, because there's quite a dark shadow, especially directly under her chin, and that shadow also helps pop out her chin. So you want to make sure you get that contrast in the painting. And I could have used, for example, cobalt blue there. I could have used ultramarine blue. I could have used a lot of different colors, but I couldn't have used a lot of different values. By the way, the paint color I used there was Winsor Violet, and the orange was created by a mix of Opera and Cadmium Yellow Pale. And you see this same lesson repeated throughout the painting. I got her pupils and her eyelashes really, really dark. That should be the darkest point in the painting, because that is where the most interest is, because that is where I want the viewer's eyes to keep going back to. So you want to use value too to help direct the viewer's eye back to the area of highest interest. Highest interest in this painting being the eyes. So my darkest dark is going to be in her eyes. And also the highest level of contrast is going to be in the area of interest. So later you'll see me in the painting make the background really dark against her right or left cheek. And that tells the viewer's eye to go back there. So you can use value also to help the viewer understand where to look in the painting. And so where the darkest darks and the highest amount of contrast are will be in the center of interest. And that is all created by the values, the lightest values next to the darkest values. My next tip in painting successful children is to avoid the earth colors. When you're painting glowing skin tones, what are the earth colors? Examples include burnt sienna, the ochres, burnt umber, a cerulean blue, which is very granulating, and it also tends to gray down the colors that it is added to, which is a very important thing to do. So you need earth colors in your palette, yes, but you do not need earth colors in your skin tones because they serve to gray down areas, and you don't want gray looking skin. You want glowing skin. So you can see here I'm painting her hair and I'm using burnt sienna, which is a beautiful earth color that I use in almost every single painting that I do, but I'm carefully avoiding using it in her skin, and I'm only using it to create the darks and the textures in her hair. So there is definitely a place for the earth paints in your paintings, but it's not in skin. It is in the hair, it's in the background to gray down areas, to tone down areas, and to add granulation interest. My next tip is about backgrounds. And typically what you want your backgrounds to accomplish is to support the foreground subject, which is the child in the foreground. And what that usually means is that they're going to be grayed down, they're going to be possibly darker, they're certainly going to be very soft, wet backgrounds. So that always means, almost always when you paint your backgrounds behind a child, you want to paint them wet, you want to keep them soft, and you want to keep them grayed down. So here you can see me mixing the colors for my background. I'm using a mix of Winsor Violet, Indigo Blue, which itself is a mix of Phthalo Blue and Lamp Black, some Cobalt Blue, and some random greens that I have on my palette to gray down this blue. So it's not a bright glaring blue, it's a darker blue, it's a gray blue. And a blue is a wonderful complement to orange. What is the complementary color of orange? It's blue. So you want a gray blue in your background if you want your orange/pinkish skin tones to really pop. So it just worked out perfectly well for this painting that I happen to have sky and waves behind this girl in the background, and I can just gray them down, and those grays will serve the purpose and do the job of making my orangish, pinkish skin tones look even brighter when I put this gray in. They look bright now, but once I put something dark, soft, and gray in the background, it will make those skin tones look even more alive, even more bright, more saturated, more glowing. So keep that in mind. I see a lot of beginners do paintings without backgrounds, but backgrounds are so important because they play a supporting role. Yes, backgrounds are hard. They're harder than the foreground subject usually. They're scary. I get it. But they're so important to help make your foreground subject really pop out. So be brave and practice a background in every painting you do, and you'll continue to improve and gain confidence as you practice. All right, we're coming to the last tip where I think I have the most useful advice, because this is the point in my last painting of this girl where I went really wrong. And I think where I went wrong was building up glazes, but keeping each glaze too flat and the same color across too large of a space. And what I ended up doing in that last painting was in my mind, I was trying to push her skin tones to really make them pop and glow. And what really happened is they started looking chalky, overworked, and flat, as in all the same color over a large area, surface area of her face. And then the edges got stiff, of course. And you can do some scrubbing to fix that, but it's a lot better to keep everything light and soft like they are right now. So my last tip is to use glazes to build delicate layers of value and color in the skin. That being said, make sure you keep your glazes really delicate. And glazes are called glazes for a reason. They're very thin and transparent, and you don't want to cover any large area with the same exact color and value and make it look like a flat plain. You want to have a little pink in this area of the cheek, and then as the light changes up towards her eye, it should be lighter. And even in this painting, I didn't keep the tops of her cheeks light enough, and I had to go in later and scrub them, which I'll talk in depth about how I did that in my tutorial on Patreon. And you really want to go slowly when you're painting these areas with glazes, and make sure you have enough control of your paint so that the paint doesn't seep into the lighter areas. And the way that you do that is when you put down your wet clear water wash, like I do for each glaze, you let it dry enough so that you can maintain control of your paint in your paintbrush, and you make sure you don't have too much water in your brush and just enough paint so that you maintain control of where the color goes. That is why, especially with watercolor, you just have to practice so much and really learn your materials and how they interact together. How much water do you need on the paper? How much water do you need on the brush? How much paint and water do you need on the brush? There's a lot to keep track of, so I do encourage you to keep trying. And if you mess up a painting, do it again, and then do it a third time. And especially for beginners, you might even want to paint it a fourth time. And that is the best way to learn how to paint with watercolor. So those are my tips, and I hope they were helpful. And next, let's look at some of my favorite color combinations for painting skin tones, Caucasian skin tones. And I need to do a whole video on darker skin tones as well. All right, let's do a few combinations and just test out what might make a good combination. Now, the only red that I use on my palette is Naphthol Red by M. Graham. I've tried a lot of other reds, and I have come to the conclusion this is the red for me, so that's the only red that I'm going to try out. And for me, the cadmiums are too chalky. I am afraid to use them in skin colors because they are so chalky looking. All right, this is M. Graham Naphthol Red plus Quinacridone Gold. It looks like it has a lot of brown in it to me, so I am very skeptical about using this, but let's just see for experiment's sake how they look. And this is about the consistency you're going to be using in your glazes right here, that much water added. So, and let's add a little Winsor Violet, which is my favorite way to cool off skin colors, and just see how that looks too. Now, let's try a Cadmium Yellow Pale. Get us a nice puddle of Naphthol Red there. A good little dollop of my Cadmium Yellow Pale. Look how chalky that looks. Do you guys? All right, but let's add a lot of water and see how they look. I mean, that's a beautiful orange. It really is quite pretty. There's also a Cadmium Yellow Light out there by another manufacturer, and I think they're different pigments. So just be aware, Cadmium Yellow Pale and Cadmium Yellow Light are not necessarily the same paint colors. And see that Quin Gold is such a beautiful glowing color, but I'm not sure if it's quite right for skin tones. All right, let's do my favorite, I think, which is my favorite, which is Naphthol Red, Aureolin, and then add a little bit of Winsor Violet. All right, after all those tests, I have come to my conclusion that these are my two favorite combinations, the Naphthol Red, Holbein Aureolin, and Winsor Violet. And these just absolutely glow in these glaze style washes, which is very watery. So if you're wondering as a beginner, what is a glaze? This more accurately reflects what it is. It's a paint with quite a bit of water added, so that the paint particles themselves have a lot of freedom to move around, and it just makes such glowing washes. And that's another reason why glazes are so powerful, because when you add water to watercolor, it allows the pigments to kind of move around and interact and make these beautiful glowing looking glazes and washes. It is watercolor after all, so watercolor really is at its best when you add quite a bit of water, and that's why, yet another reason why artists so commonly use multiple layers of glazes to create these glowing skin tones. All right, you guys, thank you so much for tuning in to Rachel's studio, and I hope these tips were helpful. with your paintings of children. And be sure to check out my other videos of tips and my watercolor beginners series. I have several playlists that you may find helpful. And for example, even if the video is about how to paint horses, you'll find a lot of tips that can generalize across a lot of different subjects. So I hope you enjoy them, and thank you so much for joining me again. Again, leave me a comment, let me know what you think, and leave your own tips if you're feeling generous. I'll see you guys next week. Bye, guys.